This week on Great Chat, we're talking about the art of quitting. How do you know when to quit? Is there a right time to do it? Did someone hand you a playbook the last time you quit, and does that same playbook work today? I'm Sally, and this week we're joined by Helen and Ashley. This podcast is brought to you by Mercury, the fintech used by over 200,000 companies to simplify their finances. We're huge Mercury fans at Great Chat, and we use it to run this podcast. A few of us are also current customers for our funds and startups, not to mention the dozens of founders we've backed as VCs, angels, and scouts that run their businesses on Mercury. If you're launching a startup or fund, visit mercury.com to apply online in 10 minutes or less. The onboarding couldn't be more intuitive or delightful.
All right.
Hello.
Hi, guys.
Hello from my new podcasting studio.
I know. No one can beat this background.
Yeah, for anyone who is listening, I'm on a boat right now, and it's in a harbor, and I'm visiting my parents. By the time you hear this podcast, I'll be back in New York, but their Wi-Fi at their house is terrible. They live on an island, and but tethering from this harbor works, and so maybe this is like my podcasting hack. When I visit my parents, you'll always, if you see me on a boat, you'll know I'm with family. So,
Are you on a Starlink? No, right?
no, not a Starlink, just like T-Mobile tethering. I think there's like a tower or something near here.
I love it. I feel like we were promised Starlink on all the Uniteds, and we have issues getting connected on those airplanes. The best Wi-Fi apparently is on Burning Man, on the playa.
Oh my gosh. Well, were we just talking about how Burning Man, depending on your like feed algorithm, was either like very dark and like homicide news heavy, or it was like, I mean, I saw a lot of like best burn evers, and then I saw the baby that was born, but yeah, and then on Twitter it sounds like Burning Man is like, you know, millennial cringe sort of activity, which means we should definitely go. But
Did you guys double click on the baby thing? Because it was a surprise baby. Like,
oh, yes.
Neither parent knew that there was a pregnancy. And then, like, a baby was born. And, like, they were both like, oh, this is amazing. What a miracle. And I'm just like, I just don't understand how anyone can,
I feel like we do read about that. Yeah, I mean, you hear, this isn't, like, the first time we've read a headline like that. But as somebody who's given birth twice, like, I don't know.
The wild thing is, it did not even hit my feed that there was a birth at Burning Man. All I got was the murder on the playa.
It's the polarization of news.
It was crazy because the mainstream media coverage, like, all opens with, like, a man was discovered in a pool of blood as people gathered around a wooden effigy and, like, lit it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this sounds like devil worship. Like, if you don't know the rituals of Burning Man, like, it must sound so insane to be encountering this festival through the lens of a murder.
Well, speaking of feeds, we were also talking about how I'm getting served nonstop sorority recruitment videos. And so,
Helen, which one are you going to join?
I am already part of Gamma Phi Beta, so loving PKE, everyone. But I was making this comment, so like I can't get enough, and like shout out to the women at MIT who just also posted a fire video, like I don't see why they can't take part. But that reminded me of something that I said like a long time ago when it was like the Hunger Games era of like tech recruiting, like I would say like late 2010s. There's like so many hot startups, they're all fighting for talent, and you started to see this role called like candidate experience manager pop up at places. And I made this joke that everything I ever learned about tech recruiting, I learned at Sorority Rush. And that sounds funny, but it's like one of the like cardinal rules that I remember was every girl, whether or not, you think that they are a fit, needs to believe that they are going to be getting a bid on bid day from your sorority. And the reason for that is because freshman girls, when they rush, like they all go back to their dorms and they all talk about, who they're ranking and which houses they liked. And if they feel like they're not going to get a bid from you, then they're going to like hedge and like talk shit, right? Because they don't want to like say that that they love this sorority and then they don't get a bid and it's like crushing. So they want to just like, like hedge and be like, oh, well, I didn't want them anyways. And that is not what you want. And I feel like similarly at startups, right? Like candidate experience is so important. Even, even if it becomes like clear during the middle of the like, batch interview, that this person is probably not going to work out. Like it's really important to give everybody a really great experience. And I feel like a conversation I've had with founders is often like, no, we have to let people know that like they're not a fit, that they're not going to cut it. And I'm like, what good does that do for anybody? But anyways, that was like the thing that I remembered. And I am going to continue to watch all of these Rush videos for like probably another couple of weeks.
I went to NYU, so I missed out on the whole sorority thing. I don't think we had any sororities. I think we had one like business frat, and I had just moved from Australia.
Were they cool?
I mean, everything is subjective from a lens, whoever want to see it. So the only acclamation I had to U.S. culture and sororities was, I think, 10 Things I Hate About You. And
oh, were there sororities in that? I thought that was like a high school movie.
Oh, no,
yeah,
you're right.
Yeah.
Sally's still acclimating.
Yeah, I'm still. Excuse her. It's a decades-long process.
I went to Georgetown, and the only sorority option was the Foreign Service sorority, which I didn't pledge, and it was kind of unfair. Like the guys actually had a house. But there was no house for the ladies, so we just went to like guest speaker stuff, and then we were invited to parties at the embassies, which actually was
that's
pretty
cool.
But like very nerdy, very Georgetown,
very DC.
But my best friend from high school went to UPenn, and I'd go visit her every year. And there was like a real sorority culture there, and she was in a so I was like, it was crazy. I was like, how are our college?
But did she live in the house? Because I've had friends that went to like Penn State, and they said that there aren't sorority houses because in the state of Pennsylvania there are still those laws about like a certain number of women can't live together, or else it becomes like a brothel or something.
She actually did not live in the house, but the house was where all the parties were.
That's right, exactly.
And
which
still
I think
a big
is so
part of
strange.
her identity and her friend group was like so tied to this sorority, and I was like, oh, that's so crazy. So different worlds, but I like the tech recruitment. Helen, I think you need to write that blog post.
My favorite story of the week was that Anguilla is making millions off of .ai. So I don't know if you remember. Actually, I didn't even know. I was reading through it, and I guess in the 80s, everybody was issuing out whatever the country, like 2-letter symbol. So like if it was Australia, it's .au, and Korea, .kr, and Anguilla is .ai, and every year they're making like millions of dollars. I think they got paid $700,000 for U.ai. So I thought that was just fascinating, a little nugget.
I think it's like tens of millions, so it's real money for like a smaller country. I like went down a little bit of a rabbit hole because there have been other things like this. Do you guys remember the trend when like every startup was .ly? So like
yes.
Bitly or whatever.
Yes,
like
Grammarly, which is why like
Yep,
I don't know why Grammarly did not take Coda's name when they acquired them.
Well, especially now that they have like a bigger tent and they're like acquiring all this stuff, it's like Grammarly feels like a very narrow value prop. Libya is .ly, so they benefited from that craze. .me is Montenegro, and then the one near and dear to my heart, .vc, is Saint Vincent and the Grenadines. So
I did see that.
That's so great.
So, who knows which countries will benefit next?
What were some other ones like .co, .cc,
.xyz?
Yeah.
I don't think all of them
.xyz was like a big
countries.
crypto one.
It was.
Yeah.
All the .xyzs became .ais in a period of 6 months after ChatGPT was launched.
So the other one that we've been chatting about was the post, or one of many posts, and then the sort of conversation around like 996 culture and how now you're locked in. It's 996, and what was it like? Lift, eat meat. Mary Young.
I'm gonna read it. It's from excerpted from an article from SF Standard. The article is titled "Burning Man is for the olds. Just ask the AI kids." Ouch. Helen, to your point, Burning Man is now millennial cringe.
I've never been to Burning Man, so I'm Yeah.
No, I know. Sally's the only culprit on this
Look at
particular
me, the
podcast.
resident burner.
But a 23-year-old co-founder of an AI startup said the current vibe is no drinking, no drugs, 996, which means working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, lift heavy, run far, marry early, track sleep, eat steak and eggs. So that is like the Gen Z mantra.
Yeah. So I feel like there's two conversations. One is like, okay, that's insane. Also, marry young for what exactly? Given that schedule, and then the other is just this sort of broader question of whether people posting this and talking about this, it's more performative than ever, and that there's always been a grind culture, but the thing that is different now is that people are posting about it. And I think we've talked about like different flavors of like hustle porn that we've seen, but I think now that there's like a name like 996 or people really putting in job descriptions like that this is a 996 culture, like I think that's something that's kind of different.
I also have two trains of thought on this one. I feel like, I grew up parts of my childhood in Asia, and Asian culture is very, very much a 996 culture. It starts from middle school, high school. We would go to school, and then at the end of school, we would do these like after school curriculum that runs until midnight, and this is all the way till you get to college, and then it gets much worse, and you see a lot of burnout through that. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing in some of the cultures in Silicon Valley as well, and it's something like a lifestyle that like it at the time seems like you pack everything in, you jam everything in, and you get so much done, but then you actually don't have. When you don't have time to like process and think and pontificate on various things, I think there's a lot more downside to it. The other train of thought is I was just thinking about it as we were talking about is, I don't know, in our 20s, I do remember the time where we are so excited about like working on something new, like super excited and working hard, working late. And maybe there's some part of it that we should also embrace this hustle culture, but for the people that are really excited about it. It doesn't mean that like everyone needs to be part of this culture, but also celebrate the ones who are really excited about it. Because I think like when we were at that time, we when we merged the passion of work and passion of time, I don't know, it was just like a fun time. So that was my like two trains of thought on that.
Yeah, I think I said this a couple weeks ago, but like I was talking to somebody who just left Meta, and they're an executive. And I was sort of like, he was talking about like how insane the hours were and how he was in office 6 days a week. And I was sort of like, oh, well, like that's how it was when we worked together, like back in the day. And he stopped me and he's like, yes, because we wanted to. And It was like this chilling sort of like, oh, okay, that was like we were so young. We had nothing else to do. We might as well live at the office and work all day, right? Because you're doing it with friends and there's food and it's awesome. And he was more saying now it's like a very tops down, sort of mandate for 996. And I was like, oh, that is different. You're right.
I actually think a lot of startups and founders that are like leaning into this and embracing it, they see it as an aspirational cultural thing that they're sharing. Like, come join this company and grind, and like this is the dream versus this is the mandate. I think it feels like a mandate to people who aren't predisposed that way, but 100% like 996, I'm sure I clocked that for most of my 20s, and it's great if people are excited, but Helen, I also agree that there's a large like performative aspect there, and it's a little bit like my snarky thing is if I see people promoting their relationship too much, I'm like, uh-oh. Yeah. And I feel the same way. I feel the same way about people who are promoting how hard they're working so much. And then also, I don't know, I just like, we're in such a unique moment in technology right now. And like, yes, there's a lot, like you need to be heads down and execute, but you also need to like pull back and like there's so much space for imagination, and the path forward is so nonlinear. And I feel like if the whole culture is around just like working 24/7, like are we going to get the ideas we need to get that come in those sort of like in between spaces? So that's if you want some cover to not work all the time, just say you're like, you're dreaming up the future, and that can only happen on a run or in the shower.
Okay, so for our big topic this week, we were talking about, and it's something that we talk about quite often because in our group chat, we'll just share links to like, departure announcements or an article covering like a transition. And so I think one that caught our attention this week was Suhail Doshi, who's the founder of Mixpanel. In like, I think COVID era, he founded a company called Playground. He quit online, and I'm sure he quit before that, but I think he was just sort of like communicating that. And the note said, "There are better things to pursue with our collective time than designing casual graphics. We ought to strive to work on more important things for humanity if we have the means and energy. I am unapologetic in how I will use my time here on Earth." And I was like, that is quite a quit note.
And I think some useful context too, because in some ways it was even more dramatic how he quit. So the thing you just read was in response to someone asking him a question. So he tweeted
about
out, I am now a free
yeah.
agent. He didn't even acknowledge
right.
what was happening with Playground, his company. And
Right.
someone was like, oh, like, can you give us a memo on like why you're leaving Playground or why Playground didn't work? And this was his like full-throated response. And so I think it's like twofold. There's the piece of like, what responsibility do you have to thoughtfully communicate, like shutting down a company or moving on from a company if you're a founder? And yes, Helen, let's assume he like communicated like previously to his investors, employees, all of that. And then the second piece is this like very like dramatic statement to unpack in terms of like, how one even makes these decisions and what his lens was for leaving Playground to like, pursue other things. But yeah, definitely a fun way into this conversation.
Yeah, because I mean, I think this is a founder example, but I think we are seeing more and more, I think, transitions, in and out of venture. And then, of course, operators, I feel like there's just a pretty steady cadence of that. And, one thing that I think about because of the roles that I've held throughout my career, like exec com departures definitely like fell under my wheelhouse. And always it was like, keep it as straightforward and positive as possible. And that was like, from first principles, every player, there is just nobody who benefits from anything otherwise, because you want people to stay focused and you want people to not think about their own departures when the time comes, right? Because if there's a messy departure and, now there's like a whisper train of something, people will start thinking like, oh gosh, well, when I leave, what if that happens to me, right? And it's like, nope, you want everything to be happening, with respect and dignity and just sort of like excitement for the future for everyone else. Which is why it's such a nice reminder for me that so few investors have operating experience, because I think that that's generally understood within companies. But I feel like these days, and I don't know if it's because like we're around so many spinouts, but like I feel like if you're talking to somebody at a firm and, remarking about how somebody has recently left and now they're starting a fund and that's so exciting, it's like they'll be the first to tell you, oh, they were pushed out. It's like, oh my gosh. Or, I feel like I'm constantly in this position of being like sort of taken aback of like kind of hearing about the nitty gritty of like, how people are leaving firms. And that is such a stark contrast to me in sort of like the other world that I know. But curious what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I mean, Helen, I've obviously done like a ton of exec departures, including my own, over the years from a comms capacity. And I think the thing that people miss when they make statements like that is actually that that shows underlying insecurity rather than strength, right? Like if your firm is in a position of strength, if your company is in a position of strength, you can afford to be really gracious when someone leaves, whatever the circumstances are. And I think when people are on the defensive and feeling protective, that actually showcases, oh, you're like worried about this exodus. You're worried about the perception of the firm because this person left versus feeling really good about the bench that you have. And so I think it's a good reminder for companies like, it's not just about being kind and gracious. It's actually like the way you are perceived will come through in these communications as well.
Yeah, and actually that's really interesting you said it that way. I remember we were just sharing some of the like more notable departures in the last few months, and one that stood out to me after you mentioning is when Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross left their funds, Ilya Schwitzer put out a tweet right away being like, hey, I'm taking over control as CEO. And it felt very reactive than like they actually had a plan in place. And of course, like a lot of these things like happen very quickly, especially in this era where people are acquiring executives with huge sums of dollars in like 2-3 day periods. But it felt very, very reactive. And then I'm curious also just like how they, communicated that to their funds, which I'm sure you guys have more visibility than I do, with I think it's called NFDG. I forget what it stands for. That had a really...
It's their initials.
Oh, yeah. Obviously. But I'm curious like how when you're two GPs at a fund and you're leaving, like what do you and when do you communicate that to the LPs? I think something similar might have happened with Jack Altman and his fund. So how do you...
Jack Altman's still running his fund, but the I think you were talking about two things where it's like NFDG, yes, they raised a successful fund and they had this like awesome, accelerator too, called AI Grant. And it sounded like they departed those, and I'm sure the LPs were first to be notified. So I'm kind of answering this question of like, what is the right course of action? I think LPs who are investors, in that fund should be notified first. But also, Daniel Gross was a co-founder of SSI, right? So so like it was like dual comms. He's both leaving a fund and leaving a company, and I hope he's having a great time at Meta. But like I think that fund communication is a little different because none of it has to be public. You don't owe the public really anything. I'm sure there's for really high profile departures of like tier one firms, maybe there's some sort of exit statement. But I think that you have to assume most of the communication is just happening in a way that we can't see it.
Yeah, and maybe to get even a little bit more granular, I'm sure they both had key person provisions, meaning if either of them were not fulfilling their commitments to the fund, they would have to notify LPs, and that puts you in like a limited operations mode where you have to work with your LPs on a plan forward. And so that would actually give you some time too to figure out, okay, we think we're going to take this new role. Meta is offering this, and you can sort of like work that out with your LPs. But yeah, if you're a fund manager, I mean, the expectation is you're there for the duration of the active investing period, which they had not. I think they deployed about like half their capital. And so their first obligation is to their LPs. And then of course you also need to communicate to founders. As someone who's gone through, I was at Social Capital when Mamoon Hamid and Ted Maidenberg left. There's a lot of communications to LPs, to founders, of course, to the team. And then like to Helen's point, the public comms sometimes is a forcing function for how quickly that all happens. But on the LP front, you need to do that right away. And I know some firms who've gotten in trouble for not doing that because it's such a huge part of the trust. I mean, we've also seen some pretty high profile founder departures and even returns. So like two fun stories. Yeah, like Ryan Peterson obviously left Flexport and then came back pretty quickly. And then more recently, Ty Haney is returning to Outdoor Voices. And I guess she was kind of ousted from her company. So a little bit of different situation on the way out. But yeah, I think like a founder and CEO leaving is such a profound thing in the startup world, which is why these like hacquisitions have been so strange, where like, the CEO is joining a new company, but the company shell still exists. And so we're like, we're sort of in a new era of CEO departures and how those are communicated or not communicated. I think a lot of them have been done pretty poorly. Because what do you even say? Sorry, I got a really amazing offer. And so I'm just leaving you guys with this licensing deal.
Well, I mean, that reminds me that in today's day and age, I feel like whenever you approach somebody who is sort of in a transition or thinking about transitioning, thinking about leaving, they think in terms of the LinkedIn post. Does anybody else do that? Like when you're like thinking about a new job or you're thinking about like leaving, you're just like, oh, well, what will that announcement look like? And it's hard today not to think in those terms, as silly as that sounds, right? And I've definitely had people approach me and ask questions about like timing their departures and sort of the story around it, where it's very obvious that that's like top of mind for them. And I think that, something that we were trying to think back to all the times that like we have departed companies in our careers. The things that all of our stories had in common was at the time, it just feels so outsized. Oh, what are people going to think? People are going to think this. People are going to think that. And it's like, no one cares.
Yeah.
No one cares. And you can see that looking back. Very hard to understand that at the time. And that's something that I wish I could have told my younger self. It's like, no one's paying attention to you. People are just stoked for whatever you're doing next. And, you know, like that's what you should be focused on, the future.
Yeah, I remember when I was at CNBC and NBC News, and probably at the top of my career in the media world, and I was young and moving up the ranks quickly, and I think internally I was feeling very kind of complacent, or there wasn't much like growth within the industry, and I knew that there was a lot of exciting things going on, so I made a bet to leave, but it took me probably 2 to 3 years to actually like have the guts to leave. And even in that communication process, when I decided to jump from a big media company to a smaller, operator role at a company not a ton of people knew, I was like, oh my gosh, what are people going to think? How am I going to try to like create this like narrative arc around like I went from doing all this? Are they going to think that I like missed an opportunity or I got pushed out? And to your point, Helen, like, nobody gives a shit, and then you kind of redeem. I wouldn't say redeem. What's the word I'm looking for? Like a few years later, they're like, oh, I see why you did that move, and only you know the decisions you're making, whatever that like time of like how you felt working at this company, or like where you want to be like 5-10 years from now. And so yeah, I 100% agree with you on that.
I guess the one area I would push is I do think the comms are more delicate if you don't have your next thing lined up. Like comms around like,
I think
I'm
that's
leaving this.
happening more lately, right? People don't have a plan.
Right, more straightforward. And I mean, I've been in this place. So my first like departure comms, was like much more straightforward because I was leaving Box, where I'd been for 6 years, got the company through some really big milestones, had my successor on my team. Like, it was like very elegant. Actually, it was Erin Levy who even told me to like write a post about where I was going. So it was more about like the opportunity versus, leaving something, because my identity was so intertwined with like the Box brand. And so that was a very simple, clean comms. And then my next 2 departures were, I left Social Capital before I had my next thing lined up. I left Glossier before I had my next thing lined up. I do think those are like a little bit more delicate, but at the end of the day, it's still, the lesson is like, don't overcomplicate it. People aren't worried about this. And if you're like too defensive or worried people will think you were pushed out, like you don't want that energy coming through. And I remember Social Capital was especially hard because I left amidst a lot of change that was happening on the team and at the strategy level. And I knew it was the right, yeah, I knew it was the right thing for me to leave. I wasn't signing up for that next chapter, but I felt such a deep obligation to stay because like when I was the marketing partner and led comms, and that's when you're needed the most, right? Like in a crisis or in a moment where there's a lot of public scrutiny. And I had to talk to a mentor who was like, it's okay to make this decision for yourself. And also even told me it was like very like female coded, that I was so like ready to just like, hang on for the sake of the business and my team. But the other piece that was helpful and that I learned there is if you are leaving during like a very public time, you actually don't need to do a lot of messaging. Like it will be clear, like there were a lot of people, the Chamath was very public about making changes. There were a lot of rumors. And so I got to keep my departure like very light, very fun, very gracious, like, and not over message it. And I think this is where it's like so helpful to get some like outside eyes and to get out of your own head, because it can feel so big and you can overdo it and over message it in a way that hurts you. And to the point around like career narratives, you just want to give yourself optionality. Like careers are stories that are told in hindsight. And so you can kind of decide how you want to put those pieces together later. And so just, keep it clean, keep it simple. And I think always try to keep it as gracious as possible. One thing I was thinking about, just sort of like tied to our other conversations, but but I think I think this is like a very poignant topic because we've been talking about how employers have been breaking the social contract with employees, right? Especially with these like acquisitions where the employees are sort of like left in this company with no CEO or founder. But even like all the businesses that are doing layoffs, even when the business is doing really well, with Microsoft being a prime example. And so, the sort of obligation a company has to its employees is kind of being rewritten in real time. And I think that just means that employees are going to feel less obligation to their employers if they have other options, especially with all of the rhetoric around how AI is coming for jobs, if you have an opportunity to do something new. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if there's like way more movement, especially for people who have those options. And then secondly, I just think the AI wave is so obvious now. It's making people rethink their career decisions, right? So if you joined a hot company that's not in the AI space a few years ago, that might have seemed like the right opportunity. But I don't know. I'm sure it's the same with you. I have so many like operator friends who are like, am I crazy for not being at OpenAI or Anthropic or like being at the heart of this? And so, the most poignant example I think is like Fiji was CEO of Instacart. And that's like, like a very impressive role, but she, left that to go be the CEO of like OpenAI apps. And so I think a lot of the most in-demand people are maybe like not as worried about the optics of like leaving great jobs for being part of this next shift. And so there's just, I think probably even the norms around quitting and what the expectations are for having a story are changing just because of that more macro movement.
Yeah, I want to double click on what you talked about with the layoffs, because I think something that felt so crazy last year, I think it was last year when Meta did the layoffs and Zuck went out and said like, oh, well, these were our lowest performers. That was to me like a huge break in the social contract, right? Because like you've basically, put a stain on all of these people who left voluntarily or involuntarily over that time period where he made that statement. And I just felt like I was very surprised because I think Zuck is usually very careful, especially in the last, sort of 10 years post Cambridge Analytica. And to me, that felt like a slip because, I personally know lots of people who were affected by that and, they felt blindsided and that definitely was not, I think, how they saw their departure or like their time characterized, at Facebook for 12 years for some of them. So yeah, I do agree that the rules are changing and I'm curious to see how big companies, will communicate sort of serious reductions in force that are going to be very directly related to AI, right? Like how do you message that? But somebody had a funny tweet, was it yesterday? They shared the job description for a content strategist at OpenAI, remarking that it is a $400,000 a year job. And it's like, well, AGI is not here. Like OpenAI still needs a content strategist for ChatGPT. And it's like
a prompter.
I think this also, by the way, relates to another topic we love to talk about is we're all so focused on our personal branding. And part of that is everyone is so online. Everyone loves to talk about their, what they're doing at work and updating, and it's encouraged at a lot of these companies. So when the time comes to quit and you don't have your narrative straight, you're now thinking a little bit more about like, how do I've been prolific tweeter, I've been a prolific LinkedIn poster, whatever you are. And then you don't have control of your narrative. And I think a lot of people are probably going to go through that at this time of these layoffs that are going to continue to come. Should we go to the rapid fire questions? So the first one, related to all the topic we just talked about, do we need to have another job lined up when we're quitting?
I say no, but I think people want satisfaction in sort of knowing how you're going to spend that time. So you can anchor that in whatever. And I feel like that's something we're seeing a lot more of. It's like, I just need time and space. I need to spend time with my family is always a good one. But it's like, I think people are now like, I want to explore and take the time required to figure out what's next. And I'm just seeing that more. And I think that is a satisfying answer. So even if it's not a job, like having an answer to that, I think is good.
Yeah, again, like position of strength. What would you say if like you were the most desirable person on the planet? Like don't over explain yourself, but like keep it light. I also think I'm way more inclined to advise people to if they don't feel like they can run the job search they want to while they're still employed, to like if they have the economic stability to do so, to leave and then do it, then like to sort of like take the first decent thing that comes your way because you want to leave. I also just think, and this has been my own experience, when you like announce that you're a free agent, like our good friend Suhail just did, a bunch of really interesting things can come your way that you would have never known to seek out, nor would they have known to seek you out. So I think if you're far enough along in your career and have enough of a platform and like a reputation, it can be a real like boon for your search for what's next.
Yeah. And what's the right amount of time to give notice?
I think it's 2 weeks. I that might actually also be standard even in at-will employment in California, that there's some sort of like notice, courtesy notice. But I think that that's changing. And I also think that if you're an executive or you lead a very large team, that it should be more than 2 weeks. But there's nothing like hard and fast about it needing to be a certain time. So I think, yeah, generally the more senior, maybe, or this, not more senior, the more responsibility that you have, giving more than 2 is good.
I've never given less than, I think, 2 months. But that was also, I think, it can be kind of an amazing thing if you do have a team and responsibility. It gives people enough time to like grapple with the change, and then you can lay the groundwork for like your departure, maybe even hire in your successor or appoint your successor. But yeah, I think like the sort of minimum obligation is 2 weeks to stay on good terms with your employer.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then maybe on the other side of that is if the employee, once you give them the option, because you want to, we also talk about that the industry is really small and relationships are important. You want to be in good terms. And so you give them the 2-month leadway, and then they might say, actually, we just need, 2 to 3 weeks. But then you sort of end up in a good middle ground where both feel like they're prepared for the exit. So.
Yeah, you want to leave on good terms, right? Like if you've been there for years, you've like delivered for the company, it'd be so sad to undo that towards the end. And so to the extent you can, like doing whatever is possible to leave things in as good a place as possible, I think is worth it.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to stop. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to Great Chat. Have questions for us? Make sure to submit them at anothergreatchat.com. See you next week. Thank you.